Good morning. Happy Sabbath.
Is my mic? There it is. I was going to say, is my mic going on? I want to thank you, Luke, for that introduction. You know, of all the introductions I've been given, that is the most recent. What I want to share with you this morning, it's a little different from what I normally do, a little bit outside the box. I guess you could go so far as to say a little bit outside my comfort zone. You see, most of the time when I stand up in front of an audience or a congregation, I do so as an actor. But today I'm coming to you, well, a little bit more as a storyteller. Similar in many ways. I mean, as an actor, I tell stories. But the stories that I tell are usually other people's stories, or the stories that I've made up. And I'm comfortable with that because, well, truth be told, because I have a character to hide behind. But this morning I'm not hiding. I'm going to share with you some of my stories in a presentation that I've titled, Truth Be Told, from a guy who makes stuff up. And if this idea of an actor telling stories in church instead of a pastor actually preaching a sermon maybe seems a little odd to some of you, maybe a little bit outside your comfort zone, let me remind you that Jesus was a storyteller. In fact, we have more examples in telling stories in the scripture than actually preaching sermons. And you notice that when Jesus told his stories, the disciples would often come up to him afterwards, kind of scratching their heads and saying, Master, I don't think I got the point of that one. You might have a similar reaction to some of my stories. But I encourage you to hang in there with me. Maybe by the time the morning is over, you will have gotten the point. But I've been hearing and reading a lot about the topic of story lately. And one thought that has really captured my attention is that we are each of us living a story every single day of our lives. I mean, we have the power to control or at least influence the plot by the choices that we make. But sadly, many of our stories look a lot like this. I got up, I went to work, I came home, I watched some TV, and I went to bed. Not a very exciting story, is it? How many of you want to see that movie? But things began to change at least a little bit for me when I began to apply one simple principle to my life. When faced with a challenge, a choice, a proverbial fork in the road, whatever it is, to simply do this. Ask this question. What makes a better story? Do that. Don't get me wrong, I don't always do that, not nearly enough. Sometimes I get up, go to work, come home, and watch some TV and go to bed. It's about the best that I can muster. I am addicted to my comfort zones. But I grew up in the church, literally attending twice every weekend and once in the middle of the week. And there was always an emphasis in church on telling your story. Of course, that's not the word that we used. The word that we used in church was testimony. I always found that word just a little bit intimidating. I mean, you give a testimony in a court of law. Did I need to place my hand on the Bible and be sworn in? Brother neighbors, give us your testimony. Yes, you see, the church that I grew up in was Southern Baptist. And all the men were referred to as brothers. Now that can be very endearing, except the Southern Baptist church that I grew up in was located in Michigan. You walk into a Southern Baptist church in Michigan, and strangely, everybody talks with a Southern accent. And see, all the members are displaced Southerners who moved to the north to take advantage of the then booming job market in the auto industry, including my family. Michigan was considered, well, a foreign mission field to Southern Baptists. And evangelism was about more than saving your soul. It was about making you a good Southern Baptist as well, with a heavy emphasis on the Southern. I tried to be a good Southern Baptist kid and invite my school friends to church, but I think it was the culture shock more than the gospel that frightened most of them away. But it was common during the worship services to call for testimonies. Now, originally, I think the idea was simply this, to tell your faith story, or how you became a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ. But over the years, that morphed into anything from a prayer request to a praise report to, well, for some people, just an excuse to be noticed. I don't mean to be cruel, but there were some people who called on to testify and just didn't want to hear it. I mean, nobody wanted to hear about Sister Mary's acid reflux for the third time. And then there were other people who called on to testify. You knew it was going to be one long, drawn-out story with too many details, kind of like listening to the big gaps in the Bible. You want to skip over that to get to the good part, right? I'd like to request prayer for my brother's wife's mother-in-law's daughter. Would you be my sister? Oh, she's been hitting that cough syrup again. Yes, the prayer request. In our church, that was the spiritually correct way to spread gossip in the church. But there were other people who called on to testify. Man, their stories were really good. I used to have testimony envy. Occasionally we would have a guest speaker. Man, the stories they would tell. I mean, their stories were all about sin. Oh, not the boring little sins like I was guilty of, like cheating on tests and telling little white lies and ripping those do not remove under penalty of law tags off the pillows. No, there's stories about the really big sins. to us Baptist kids that was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which led to the really big sin for Southern Baptists of dancing. These are the people that got to have all the fun. People who used to be high on drugs and are now high on Jesus. Now, you have to remember that I was a teenager during Woodstock. So maybe you can appreciate the attraction these stories would have on an impressionable teen. Oh, how I wanted a testimony like that. I used to fantasize about going and living the heathen life just so I could make a better testimony. I mean, I wanted a testimony fit for a rock star. Instead, I got to be the kid that grew up in the church, mostly behaved, and turned out to be that Christian actor guy. Well, there's not a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in my story, although, you know, I did play drums in a rock band for a time, and it wasn't even a Christian band. But hey, these are my stories, and I'm sticking to them. As I said, I build myself as an actor. I've been acting, or at least acting up all my life. Just ask my brothers. On second thought, though, there's some of my stories I want you to hear. But I will admit that I do like to tell people that I'm an actor up to a point. What do you do for a living? I'm an actor. This is where he or she stares at me, waiting for that aha moment of recognition. It never comes. Have I seen anything? And this is where the fun ends. Oh, probably not. In movies, on stage, this is where I would love to make stuff up. Talk about the films that I did with Robert De Niro, being on stage with Meryl Streep. But my brushes with stage and film stars, I suspect, about the same as the rest of you guys, so I tell the truth. You go to church? I do one-man stage shows that deal with the Christian faith and belief, do most of my performing in churches, Christian colleges, conferences, that sort of thing. Oh, and that usually ends the conversation right there. Yes, I'm one of those. I'm a Christian actor. Translation is, you must not be very good. Or at least not good enough to make it. In fact, the Christian part about being this Christian actor guy overshadows my profession to the point that I feel I have to defend the fact that I am a real actor. I mean, I've had this conversations more times than I can count. That was really good. Thank you. No, I mean, you are really talented. Thank you very much. You ever think about going into acting? I know he meant it as a compliment, but truth be told, I am a working actor. Been making my living as an actor for over 40 years now. In a profession that has something like a 95% unemployment rate. I figure that puts me in the top 5% of my profession. But I don't say this to the guy. I learned a long time ago that when you put the word Christian in front of anything to do with the arts, Christian actor, Christian singer, Christian writer, you better be ready to be treated like a second-class citizen by the rest of the world. Truth be told, I prefer to be known as an actor who's a Christian, rather than a Christian actor. Being an actor, of course, is a profession that's often associated with being a celebrity. Being a Christian actor, not so much. Actually, I am grateful for that. I would hate to be a celebrity. But being a Christian actor does carry a certain amount of recognition with it, at least in the local faith community. People who recognize me because I've performed at their churches sometime. And I don't have the foggiest notion many of them are. You know, it seems to happen at the worst possible moments, like when I'm racing to pull into a parking space and accidentally cut somebody else off. Hey, Buster, what's the idea? Hey, aren't you that Christian actor guy? Or in the checkout at the grocery store. Hey, honey, look, it's the Christian actor guy. You'll notice that Christian actor guys have no name. There's a flash of recognition. Oh, I think I recognize them from the local Adventist church. At the same time, their eyes flash on something suspicious in my grocery cart. Oh, this, it's for a recipe. See, it's on my list of ingredients here. It's cooking sherry. Ah, yes, the Christian fishbowl. Everybody's watching and judging. My kids really hated it. To them, they felt like they were being monitored all the time. And whenever I would try to impress upon them, that mattered what they wore, and where they were seen, and what they were doing, when they were seen. Well, it was right, they could see right through me. Oh, you're just afraid of what people will think because we're your kids and you're that Christian actor guy. And as much as I hate to admit it, sometimes they were right. I lived way too much of my life trying to fit into that box that others have designed for me. It's probably one reason I don't have that great heathen testimony full of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Sort of hard to live that story if you're also concerned about making a good impression on the random church members that you run into at the grocery store. Being an actor, of course, it only makes sense that some of my stories have to do with me portraying people other than myself. In fact, whenever I do engage people in conversations about what I do for a living, I find that they inevitably want to hear stories about life on the stage. Oh, not about memorization or characterization or technique, no. No, they want to hear stories about the things that go wrong. Stories that give actors nightmares. People seem to enjoy hearing stories about the other guy's misery. I can tell you the story about the baby that crawled up on stage with me one time, forcing me to ad-lib some lines to make it look like it was supposed to happen. Oh, sweetheart, did you get out of your playpen again? And where is your mommy? Then there was a lady that didn't get the memo that this was a play that was taking place during the worship service, thought my rhetorical questions were real ones, and decided to engage me in conversation in the middle of the play. That's a really good point. Maybe we could make an appointment. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Then there was a time the battery went out on my microphone pack. The sound technician thought that he could sneak up behind me, reach in my back pocket, exchange the battery, and that no one would notice. Excuse me, have we met? But my most memorable something gone wrong story is one that I'm not really sure I want to share with you because, truth be told, because it's embarrassing. And that's probably the one you like to hear, right? Well, this happened during a performance of my adaptation of the book Into Steps by Charles Sheldon. How many of you are familiar with that old Christian classic where we get the phrase, what would Jesus do? Well, being a period piece that takes place back in the early 1900s, I did what a lot of actors do when trying to roll back the clock on stage, and I shopped for an appropriate suit of clothes at a local thrift store. Now, having done this play for over 30 years and over 1,000 different performances, you can appreciate the fact that I've gone through more than one costume during the run of this play. Clothing wears out, especially clothing bought at a thrift store. Bodies change over time, as I'm sure some of you know. I wish I could get back that body I had 30 years ago. Anyway, there's a point in the story where I play this out-of-work drifter, this tramp, who comes into town looking for help. And at one point in the story, he actually interrupts the worship service at the local church. Now, to play this part, I put on an old coat, and I walk right down into the congregation to become this tramp. At the end of the tramp's speech, he has a heart attack. He falls to the floor, and he dies. As I'm falling to the floor, I hear, or rather feel, a distinct vibration coming from the seat into my pants. This is followed by a rather profound draft in the back of my thighs, and I am suddenly aware that the entire seat into my pants is ripped out. From stem to stern, I'm having a legitimate wardrobe malfunction long before Janet Jackson coined the phrase. At moments like this, time stands still, and what's only seconds feels like an eternity. And the first thought that pops into my head is my mother's advice, always wear clean underwear in case you're in an accident. I don't think this is what she had in mind. You know, there's many ways that an actor can die on stage. And at the moment, I'm seeing the headline, "Actor Dies of Exposure on Stage," because at this moment, I wanted to die. But then, I catch my breath, and I pray for God to, quite literally, save my rear end. Now you have to realize, I'm about 10 minutes into a play that goes almost an hour long. What am I going to do? I weigh my options. Well, I could just stand up and tell the audience what's happened and excuse myself to go put on another pair of pants. Sing another hymn, will you? 2, continue to play dead. Wait for the audience to think, maybe he really is dead. And they call 911 and I wait for the paramedics to come and carry me out. Or 3, somehow, by the grace of God, continue on with the show. Now, considering this last option, 2 phrases come ringing into my head. One is, the show must go on. Sounds good, but how? And then the voice of my high school drama teacher comes ringing. An actor never turns his back on the audience. That's it. That's what I'll do. I'll continue on with the show, and I'll never turn my back on the audience. I'm a professional. I can do this. So I began to restage the play, and I learned a new way to walk. And you realize I'm actually down on the floor level. I have to get back up onto the platform to continue on with the play. But you know when you go up a mountain, you don't go straight up, you zigzag, right? So again, to zigzag my way up the steps. And I continue on with the play, never turning my back on the audience. At the end of the play comes the final test. I'm supposed to exit down the center aisle. As I'm exiting, I'm praying, please nobody turn to watch me go. Eyes to the front, please. Now is not the time to ask the question, boxers or briefs? Well, I make it to the foyer without exposing myself to the audience, and thankfully without having to retitle this play from In His Steps to Moonstruck. You know, you can't prepare for moments like that in rehearsal. Or maybe you can. You know, I think it's one thing to play your part in life the way that you rehearsed it. But I think it's the unexpected moments in life that test us. It was knowing my craft through study, preparation, and yes, rehearsal, that gave me the skills and confidence to respond appropriately when disaster struck. There just might be a lesson in there for all of us, actor or not. In the Bible, the book of James, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that it is the testing of your faith that develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." Kind of gives you pause, doesn't it? Consider it joy when the bad stuff happens. You ever notice that stories, good stories, are all about things going on? Think about it. The best books, the best movies, all have something going on. Without the tornado, we would never discover The Wizard of Oz. Without the evil Mr. Potter, It's a Wonderful Life wouldn't be all that wonderful of a story. And even a true story like the gospel would be pretty boring without the devil. And if our hero Jesus didn't have to go through the crucifixion in order to give us that ultimate happy ever after ending. Yet we try to live our lives avoiding the trials, the conflicts, the bad stuff. And I know sometimes those conflicts aren't necessarily choices. Sometimes they're just things that happen. An act of God. Ever notice how we use that phrase in conjunction with bad things happening? Thousands killed in an earthquake is an act of God. Stop and help somebody stranded at the side of the road. You're just a really nice guy. A really nice guy, perhaps, who does things motivated by God's Spirit working through him. That's an act of God. You know, I've heard it said that one of the hardest things for God to do is to work a miracle and then get credit for it. I'm quick to blame him for the bad things that happen, and sometimes neglect to give him credit for the good things. But bad things do happen, don't they? The rain falls on the just and the unjust. I tell you, sometimes life feels like one of those movies where something bad happens, and the more the careful tries to fix it, the worse the situation gets. Can really. I mean, it may start out as an act of God, but I find many times the situations I find myself in are situations that are caused by my own actions. And those can be embarrassing. An act of chuck. And sometimes especially hard to treat as joy, pure joy. I've had the good fortune in my ministry to travel all over this world, but my wife, Lori, has often had to stay behind to care for our 3 sons and to keep her day job. So when my ministry board of directors donated a vacation to us in Mexico in honor of our years of service, we were delighted to be traveling together. We planned a trip for February, a good month to escape cold, wet, and sometimes frozen Oregon. I had a performance in Grants Pass, Oregon, and we were to leave on a Sunday. We were to leave on a Monday morning early. Now, Grants Pass, from where I live in Salem, is about a 3.5-hour drive, and it involves going over the Sexton Mountain Pass. I drove to Grants Pass in good weather on Saturday, did my Sunday morning performance as snow was beginning to fall. After the performance, I grabbed a bike to eat, hit the road, get me home. Sandy beaches were calling my name. About 10 minutes up the road towards the mountain pass, and the snow's getting heavier, and traffic is beginning to slow to a stall, then being diverted off the highway. I-5, it appears, has been closed due to not just snow, but apparently some power lines have fallen across the freeway, and with the storm conditions, it's going to be a few hours before they get the roads open. State Patrol gives us the option of waiting it out here in this rest area, or turning around and going back to Grants Pass. Well, so I decided to wait it out. We need to leave our home by 4 o'clock in the morning to make our early morning flight. Not a problem, I had the time to kill. So I pull into the rest area and I call my wife, Lori. "Hi, honey, hit a bit of a snag. I won't be home quite when I expected." I explained the situation. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Are you all right? And be careful. Make sure you drink lots of water. You do have water, don't you?" I don't. Lori is a bit of a health nut, and she is constantly trying to get me to drink more water and less coffee. "No, but there's a market over here where I can pick some up, but I don't think it'll be too late." I realize once they get the roads open, I'm going to need my tire chains on, so I go ahead and I chain up my vehicle. And I wait, and I wait, and I wait. "Hi, honey. I know it's been 2 hours, but the road's still closed." "Oh no, what are we going to do? What if they don't get the road open?" "I'm sure they'll get the road open." "Are you drinking water?" I'm going to go get some just as soon as we hang out. Truth be told, I wasn't all that thirsty. And I didn't want to think about the bathroom stops that would be needed if I drank a bunch of water. But I dripped over to the market, and I get some snacks, some coffee, some water, just in case. 2 hours turns into 4 hours. I hate to tell you this, but the road's still closed. Oh no, now what are we going to do? Why did you book that stupid show in the first place? You knew we were going on vacation. If you don't get home, suddenly it's my fault. I should have known that an act of God was going to happen and jeopardize our vacation. And this time she hangs up and didn't even ask me if I was drinking water. Finally, after 5 hours, they open the roads. Chains are required, but I'm ready. But I realize it's now after 5 o'clock, it's getting dark. And with the storm conditions, it's going to take me more than 4 hours to get home. Optimistically, I think maybe I can make it in 5 hours. Little did I realize that I was looking at over 100 miles of chains-required driving. But I'm moving. Another 10 minutes down the road, and I hear the familiar clack, 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 clack of a tire chain slapping the fender of my truck. Oh, no, this is not good. I pull over, and I get out to go confirm the problem. Yes, a section of the right rear tire chain's busted, slapping the fender of my truck. What am I going to do? I can't take the chains off. I need them for the road. I have no way to repair it. I'll just have to live with it, I guess, and accept the damage it's doing to my truck. I go to get back into the vehicle and I left the truck running when I got out to check for the damage. And it ingrained in my brain to always lock my vehicle when I get out of it. I just locked my keys inside a running vehicle on the side of a mountain during a snowstorm. This act of God has suddenly been hijacked by an active truck. What am I going to do? I do have my cell phone and AAA. I'll call them and wait. For how long? I can't afford to wait. Standing outside my vehicle on the side of a mountain during a snowstorm. I have a vacation to get to. There's only one solution I can think of. I must break into my truck. Now, my Dodge Dakota had one of those extended cabs with the little vent windows over the back seat. This looks like the best option. I'm able to wedge my fingers beneath the glass. This is going to work, I think. Just a bit more pressure, and boom! The window explodes, shattering into thousands of pieces that mostly go inside the truck. Not all of it went inside the truck. Some of it also flew in my face. And a few shards found their way into my exposed hands. I'm bleeding, but not mortally wounded. Well, I get back inside the truck, brush the glass off the seat, and resume the truck home. Clack, clack, clack from the broken tire chain. Cold air is coming inside the broken window. I have my fingers wrapped in Kleenex to stop the bleeding. And I think I got all the glass off the seat. But I'm moving. I'm torn. Do I call Lori? She's already pretty upset with me. I'm not sure I want to call and confess my stupidity at this point. I wait, drink some more water. Want to have some good news to tell her when I called. I had to pull over again, blah, blah, blah. But I'm drinking water. Well, she was thrilled to hear that at least I was moving, and I milked the bleeding hands for all that they were worth, distracting her from the possibility of still missing our flight. Finally, just after midnight, I make it home. I am exhausted, and hardly in the frame of mind that I wanted to be for going on vacation. We get to the airport in time, we check in for the flight. On board the plane, I'm seated between Lori and a talker. I'm not one to talk much on airplanes. I like to read, and in this case, catch some sleep. So, you going on vacation? Yep. Great. Hey, what do you do for a living? I'm a Christian actor. It worked. I slept all the way. Joy, pure joy. You know, I remember thinking when I was a kid that when one became a Christian, bad things like this story, would cease to happen. Really? Where do we get such crazy ideas? That's not truth in advertising, that's bad PR. The heroes of the faith in the Bible endured all kinds of conflicts and trials, and some even death for what they believed. I've sensed that the heroes of the faith in my own personal life are those same kinds of people. Show me a person of deep conviction who truly lives their faith, and I'll show you somebody who's probably walked through some pretty deep valleys in life. Being a Christian doesn't protect us from the bad stuff, but it does give us the faith and the hope and the courage to persevere, and sometimes even with joy, pure joy. I love my family. I have 3 sons, Jonathan, Ryan, and Liam, a daughter-in-law, Mallory, and 2 grandchildren, Lucy and Jude. Ryan, our middle son, was our miracle baby. He was born prematurely, and when he was just 6 weeks old, we found ourselves in a bit of a tough spot with him. We still don't know to this day what the illness is that he got. But he developed what appeared to be cold symptoms. Lori took him to the doctor and had one of those experiences that maybe some of you have had, that while you're with the doctor, the child appears to be just fine. And the doctor looks at you like you're some paranoid, overreactive nutcase who doesn't know anything about raising kids. Lori brought Ryan back home, but we both noticed that things weren't right with him. He would have these moments when he was sleeping, when he would stop breathing. Sleep apnea. It was mild at first, but over the next 24 hours, these spells became more frequent. And then he had a couple of episodes where it was actually hard to wake him up out of these spells. We were frightened. We phoned the doctor and said we were taking him into the hospital. We were terrified as we drove to the hospital, desperately trying to keep our son awake and alive. We honestly thought that he died on the way to the hospital. Once we get him into the emergency room, we didn't even know it. He's acting just fine. Just the way you'd expect a 6-week-old baby to act. Now the doctor's convinced that not only is mom in us case, it looks like maybe dad is too. The doctor's holding a sleeping Ryan. He's about to send us home when it happens again. Ryan stops breathing. This time, the doctor's able to see firsthand that we are not nuts. And the doctor's not able to get him to breathe again on his own. We are rushed out of the emergency room as the doctor and the nursing staff will rush into action. When we next see our little baby, he is strapped to a table with tubes running everywhere and a machine breathing for him. He would stay that way for several days as numerous tests were conducted to try to figure out what was wrong with our little baby. We were in the critical care ward of Emmanuel Children's Hospital in Portland, Oregon. Over the next several days, as we kept vigilant, we got to meet and know several other people in this most terrifying place. We had no immediate family in the area, but our church became our family, and they were of great support, especially our pastor and his wife. Children died while we were in this place. Children we'd seen and met. We saw parents grieving. During a moment when Ryan was stable, Lori remarked to our pastor, "Well, thank God Ryan's not as bad off as some of these other children here." Sometimes you learn from your story when it's all over. Sometimes if you're fortunate, you can learn from your story while it's happening. This was one of those times. Our pastor looked us both in the eyes and said, "What if you were? What if Ryan were as bad or even worse off than some of these other children here? I'm not trying to be morose, but I want you to be prepared. What if Ryan dies?" Well, I hear you thanking God that Ryan's not as bad off as some of these other children, but Ryan's not out of the woods yet. And I'm concerned about what you'll think about God if it gets worse. If Ryan were to die, would you still be all right with God? It was a soul-penetrating question. Bad things do happen. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Just because we pray, we have faith, we believe, doesn't mean that Ryan's going to pull out of this unscathed or even alive. Our pastor was right to ask us that question. We needed to confront the possibility of death. I think it was easier for me to get there than for Lori. I had more experience with the death of family and friends during my life. Lori, at this point in her story, had never really experienced the death of somebody she was truly close to. It gave us an opportunity to reconcile our faith in God. We needed to come to a place in our faith that would persevere, regardless of the outcome. Fortunately, Ryan's condition did improve. As a precaution, we were sent home with him attached to a contraption known as an apnea monitor. If he stopped breathing for more than just a few seconds, an alarm would sound. Now, Ryan never set off the alarm for legitimate reasons, but every time he'd fill his diaper, the alarm would sound. Having your baby wake you at 3 o'clock in the morning just because he wants his diaper changed? Give me a break. Our other two sons got no such luxury. We were so very glad the day the poop alarm was returned to sender. You ever notice that when bad things happen, we have a tendency to want to blame somebody? Blame God, blame the devil, blame another person. Ryan got sick, almost died. Who to blame? Well, that's not so clear. Sometimes the fixing blame is appropriate. I mean, you get in an accident caused by a drunk driver, it only seems natural to blame the drunk driver. But sometimes I think we can be quick to shoulder blame that doesn't belong to us. My sister Loretta was the youngest and only girl in our family. I had two older brothers, but I was closest to Loretta. We would play together, and in many ways at this time in our life, she was not only my sister, but probably my best friend as well. The actor in me was very much alive at age 10, and Loretta at age 5 was my co-star. She would play cowboys and Indians with me, and I would return the favor and play house with her. So one day in October of 1965, we were playing in the backyard with some of my cousins. Now, in addition to being John Wayne in Cowboys and Indians, I also like the old Tarzan and Hercules movies. So on this particular day, we were playing Hercules. Now, we had a punching bag in our backyard, which consisted of a metal stand with a sturdy rod spring coming out of it with the bag on top, only the bag was missing. So what was left was this little wooden block on top of this sturdy rod spring. I, being Hercules, never mind that at the age of 10 had the physique of a toothpick, was demonstrating my superhuman strength by standing on that metal stand and bending that rod all the way down to the ground, with my face directly over the wooden block. Remember, this is a kid who one day grew up to lock his keys inside a running car on the side of a vehicle during a snowstorm. With my face directly over that block, that rod slipped out of my hand, bam, that block hit me right in my left eye. My eyes were bulging out of my head as I ran screaming to find my mother. Chucky, what happened? They rushed me to the hospital in the emergency room. The nurse asked, what happened to you? Have a seat, the doctor will be right in. What happened to you, young man? Fortunately, my mom was able to translate. The doctor felt the eye could be saved. But I would need to stay in the hospital for several days and be very still with both eyes bandaged. You see, they were afraid that the good eye might overcompensate for the bad eye, so it was best to bandage both during the healing process. I got to experience what it was like to be blind for a week. Although I was caught cheating several times, I threw the corner of the bandage of the good eye to explore my surroundings. When you're 10 years old, stuck in a hospital and told to be still, give me a break. I have to say that story became very important to me during that time. And I loved having my mom visit. And she would read to me the adventures of Pippi Longstocking. I also scored my very first transistor radio, complete with earphone, the iPod of the 60s. While I was in the hospital that first night, my dad decided to join me as a patient. He had a severe attack of diverticulitis, a disease that can cause an infection and, in the worst case scenario, an obstruction in the bowel. My dad had the worst case. He wound up in the hospital requiring surgery to remove several feet of his intestines. My poor mom would spend her time divided between her son on one floor of the hospital and her husband on the other. Can you imagine her life during that time? After about a week in the hospital, I was sent home. My dad followed about a week later. In the 60s, they tended to keep you in the hospital a little bit longer than they do these days. The eye was going to make it. My dad would be all right if he watched his diet and avoided certain foods. Life, it seemed, was returning to normal. You ever heard that adage? Bad things happen in groups of 3. I don't know where that comes from or how scientific that is. I mean, where do you start to count? What might be your number 1 might be somebody else's number 3. But in any case, the rule of 3s seemed to apply to us that October. Where I was in kindergarten, and I was in 5th grade. We lived close enough to our elementary school to be walkers, so I would walk to school in the morning. Loretta would be driven to school at midday, then we would meet up after school and walk home together. This was October. The pattern was set. Having started school in September, we were into the routine. Maybe it was the routine that gave Loretta the confidence. Maybe it was excitement just wanting to see your dad who just got home from the hospital the day before, but for whatever the reason, on that fateful day, Loretta decided not to wait for us, but to walk home instead with some girls that lived across the street. She went into their house to use the restroom, and then she charged out of the house to run across the street to our house. I was walking down the street and I saw the lights of the police car in front of our house. Somebody was lying in a mud puddle. Lots of people crowded around. My mom came charging out of the house and intercepted me. Is that your sister? I don't know. Don't stop. Go home. Loretta clung for life for a short time. But in 24 hours, she was gone. This was the 60s. Racial tensions in Michigan were at their height. The driver of the vehicle that struck my sister was an African American. It would have been convenient and easy to blame him. The truth be told, Loretta literally darted out in front of the vehicle. The driver had no warning. Who to blame? Was this Loretta's fault? She was just a child, hardly responsible for her actions. It was my parents' fault. Maybe they could have taught their children better how to cross the street, you know. Was it God's fault? Do we blame him? No. No, I knew who to blame. Me. It was my fault. It was an act of Chuck. You see, I knew if I'd only been out in front of that school just a few seconds earlier, I would have been there to walk my sister home. If I'd been there, she would have crossed the street safely. This terrible accident never would have happened. I knew that I was responsible for the death of my sister. Nobody knew I was shouldering this blame. I kept it to myself, suffering not only the grief of her death, but the idea that I was responsible for it. My parents and my brothers, they were going through their own grief. I'm sure they had no idea that I was carrying this burden as well. But you know, I believe that God sent me an angel in the form of my 5th grade teacher, Frida MacArthur. Frida was not only my teacher, but she also went to my church. And she had a terrific Southern accent. And truth be told, I had a little bit of a crush on her. Are you all right, sweetheart? Well, why don't you tell me about it, honey? Melt. It was Frida who figured out what was going on with me. She got me to talk about it, brought it to the attention of my parents. And over time, they were able to help me see that I was not responsible for this terrible accident. You know, we want our stories to have happy endings, don't we? But that can't always be the case. You know, in those dramatic testimonies I would hear as a kid, this is where you get the happily ever after ending part. But, you know, I don't have a happily ever after ending to this story. But I do know that good has come from it. My mom was able to share this story with countless people who were amazed that she harbored no bitterness against the driver of the vehicle. And my parents' faith was stronger, not weaker, during this crisis. And I learned that blaming yourself for things that go wrong can get in the way of God's grace sometimes. Oh, guilt. Guilt has a place in our life. It can be a powerful force for change. It can drive us to our knees. But false guilt is counterproductive, wastes time, and causes us to live a story that we don't deserve. You know, all you guys have stories. But you know, most of us don't spend enough time reliving them, retelling them, and learning from them. But you know, our stories shape us. They give meaning to our lives. I mean, think about it. You get older, you look back on your life, it's your stories, not your stuff. It's the relationships that you built, many of them right here in this body that we call the church, and the memories that we share that will hold true value. You only have to imagine your life without your stories to realize just how important they are. I am so thankful in my story that I didn't have to go to the depths and extremes that some people have gone in order to discover God's grace. So don't get me wrong, those dramatic stories are great and probably help countless people discover the life-changing power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But this idea, what makes a better story, doesn't mean that we need to make bad choices. Oh, sure, living the life of the heathen might make a great story, but a better story involves making good choices. And while my story may seem rather tame, maybe tame compared to some here in this room right now, really, my sins are no less than their sins. My need for forgiveness, no less. You know, God, we have the great equalizer in that we are all sinners. But when we trust in Christ, we're all forgiven. So this idea of giving your testimony, telling your story, need not be dramatic, although it may be, but you know, your story just might be the thing that can inspire, help, and encourage other people. All those trials, those conflicts, those bad things are serving to make you mature and complete, as James says, not lacking in anything. Paul says it like this: therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we rejoice in the hope and the glory of God. Not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom he's given us. Perseverance, character, hope. All things that can be found right there in your story. You know, it might be as simple as I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. I, Chuck Nagers, am just a guy. The guy who locks his keys inside a running vehicle on the side of a mountain during a snowstorm. Now I know that I have a God who's bringing me home. I'm that Christian actor guy who sometimes forgets that the glory is his, not mine. I'm that guy that carried around the guilt of my sister's death, which was not my fault, as well as the guilt of countless sins that are my fault. But I know that by God's grace, I'm forgiven. I may still get knocked in my head with my careless actions. I'll probably worry over my sick children and my sick grandchildren. Hey, I might even rip my pants in public again sometime. But I know that I have a God who forgives my sins, my faults, my fears, my foolishness, and makes a way for me to stand blameless before my God who loves me so much. Grace. Grace is amazing, isn't it? Hey, that's my story. What's yours?